Years later, investigators would trace the fall of the Bracken and Northern Railway to the afternoon its chairman handed Lydia Mercer the key to an inn no sensible person wanted. At the time, Sir Alistair Vane believed he had solved two difficulties with one piece of rusted iron. The first was Lydia herself, a 30-year-old widow who had refused the company's valuation of her cottage, orchard, and late husband's cartwright shed. The second was the White Hart, an obsolete coaching inn standing beside the old turnpike where Vane intended to lay a freight spur. The compensation hearing took place in the assembly room at Dunmere, beneath a painted ceiling of cherubs who seemed amused by human arithmetic. Railway shareholders occupied the front benches. Behind them sat smallholders whose hedges had been cut, tenants whose cottages had been marked for demolition, and tradesmen eager for contracts. Vane addressed the magistrates in the warm voice that had sold half the county shares. Mrs. Mercer asks £120 for property assessed at 48. The company has nevertheless sought a humane settlement. We offer her the White Hart Inn, freehold, together with 7 shillings for immediate expenses. Laughter moved through the room. Everyone knew the White Hart. No coach had stopped there in 15 years. Its eastern roof had fallen, its unpaid rates amounted to £6, and travelers now passed the site in railway carriages without seeing it. Lydia stood with the account case her husband had made for her. My claim includes the workshop machinery, 32 fruit trees, and the income those trees would have produced. Sentiment cannot be entered as capital, Vane replied. Neither can an apple press be entered as an empty shed. More laughter followed, this time uncertain. Vane's smile remained, but his thumb rubbed the head of his silver cane. The magistrates would not halt an undertaking authorized by Parliament. If Lydia rejected the settlement, the company would take possession that evening and deposit its valuation pending appeal. An appeal required money she did not have. Her husband Daniel had died of pneumonia 18 months earlier, leaving no child and 3 small debts she had paid by keeping freight accounts for neighboring carriers. Vane placed the key on the table. The White Hart once supported a prosperous household, he said. Perhaps Mrs. Mercer will restore it. His directors smiled at the cruelty dressed as encouragement. Lydia picked up the key. Have your surveyors included the inn's entire freehold? The company solicitor consulted a plan. House, stable yard, kitchen garden, and the strip adjoining the turnpike. 2 acres, 1 rood, and 11 perches. And no covenant, mortgage, tenancy, or easement is excluded? None known. Then write those words into the conveyance. The solicitor looked at Vane. A pause no longer than a breath passed between them. Certainly, Vane said. Lydia signed only after the sentence was added. By sunset, company men had moved her bed, stove, clothes, Daniel's tool chest, and account books to the roadside. Behind her, a steam excavator tore the first apple tree from the earth. The White Hart stood 4 miles west of Dunmere, beyond a village called Bellwether. Its sign had lost the painted heart, leaving a pale, animal-shaped absence above the door. Ivy entered through the eastern windows. One chimney leaned away from the house, and the stable roof had collapsed over 3 stalls. Beyond the rear wall, the new railway embankment rose 20 feet high, its black cinders interrupting the old view of wheat fields. Inside, Lydia found 1 dry parlor, a kitchen with a cracked range, and a bar stripped of fittings. Damp had loosened wallpaper in long curls. The staircase was unsafe after the 7th tread. Rats had occupied the pantry with greater confidence than she possessed. She counted her capital. 7 shillings from the railway, 9 shillings and 4 pence of her own, and tools worth perhaps £3 if desperation became complete. The parish demanded the first half of the rates within 14 days. She needed roof felt, food, lamp oil, and timber before she needed dignity. Lydia slept in the parlor with Daniel's account case under her head. She had not expected sleep, but exhaustion took her until the first goods train sounded beyond the embankment. The noise shook grit from the ceiling and sent rats scrambling behind the bar. In its wake came the memory of her cottage kitchen, as it had been 2 mornings earlier. copper pan above the range. Daniel's boots still beneath the settle because she had never found courage to give them away. Blossom tapping at the window. None of those things had been grand enough to trouble a magistrate's figures. Together, they had been home. At first light, Lydia made an inventory because grief became less shapeless when assigned a column. 1 iron range, damaged but serviceable. 12 chairs, 9 beyond repair. 3 oak tables, 11 pewter measures, 4 bedsteads upstairs if the floor allowed retrieval. A stone-lined well of uncertain quality. Stable blocks sufficient for reuse. Liabilities, rates, eastern roof, chimney, staircase, damp, broken glazing, and a boundary dispute likely. She gave every item a conservative value. Even ruined, the inn contained more than Vane's public laughter suggested. The seasoned oak alone might cover half the rates. That did not explain his interest, but it taught her the first rule of the White Hart. Other people's contempt was not evidence. At 11, footsteps crossed the floor above her. They came slowly. 6 steps, a pause, 4 more. Then a scrape as though a chair had moved. Lydia sat upright. Dust drifted from the ceiling. She lit the lamp, took Daniel's framing hammer and waited. The steps returned at 11:20, followed by a faint metallic sigh. The upper staircase would not bear her weight, so at dawn she examined the exterior. No ladder leaned against the house. No climbing marks disturbed the ivy. The upper windows were dark and unbroken except at the eastern end, where a brick wall had been built behind the glass. A drain pipe ended 6 feet above the ground, discharging directly against the foundation. Lydia dug a shallow trench with Daniel's narrow spade and led the water toward the kitchen garden. Beneath the mud she found paving stones, forming a carriage circle larger than the visible yard. The railway embankment covered its northern half. 3 iron survey pegs stood along the cinder slope, freshly driven and painted red. She tested their alignment with twine. They marked a curve passing through the stable yard rather than merely beside it. At the parish office, Dace refused to show her the railway's deposited plans without a written application and a 1 shilling fee. Lydia paid, reducing her food money to less than a week. The public plan showed no freight spur. A faint abrasion crossed the paper behind the inn, as if a penciled curve had been erased. Lydia laid thin paper over the sheet and rubbed it with the side of a pencil. Pressure marks reappeared. Western Mineral Connection. Dace snatched the tracing away. "You have no authority to copy a canceled proposal." "If it is canceled, why are its pegs in my yard?" He closed the book. Progress changes by the day. Outside, Lydia redrew the curve from memory. Its value became plain when she noticed that the alternate route crossed a ridge. Daniel had priced the difference between a gentle road and a steep one because an extra horse multiplied every journey's cost. For trains, the multiplication would be immense. The White Hart occupied the cheapest grade west. The villagers offered explanations readily and help less so. At the Bellwether Bakery, a woman crossed herself when Lydia mentioned the steps. "Travelers died there," she said. "Company men lodged them after the railway took their farms. Then one morning, they were gone." "How many?" "Depends who tells it. The blacksmith, Owen Rusk, remembered freight wagons leaving the stable yard at night. The parish clerk, Mr. Dace, said the White Hart had closed in 1856 because the railway destroyed the coaching trade. No deaths were recorded." The inn's last licensee, Margaret Quill, had entered the county asylum after being declared delusional. "She accused respectable gentlemen of stealing names," Dace said. "A sad business." "Where are the inn records?" "Anything valuable was auctioned." When Lydia returned, she found a gentleman in a gray coat waiting beside the pale sign. He introduced himself as Percival Shaw, land agent for the railway. "Sir Alistair regrets the discomfort of yesterday," he said. "He will exchange the inn for £50. "Its liabilities have improved overnight?" "The company may eventually require the strip behind the stables. Then it may make a proper offer when it does." Shaw's gaze passed over the cracked windows. This place damaged its last mistress. Solitude can be unkind. So can advice from men who want my land. After he left, Lydia searched the dry parlor. A built-in desk remained beneath layers of mouse droppings. Its drawers held receipts too trivial for auctioneers. Candles, oats, soap, and chimney sweeping. Behind the bottom drawer, her fingers touched a marbled paper cover. The guestbook began in 1851. Coaching passengers appeared with destinations, room numbers, meals, and amounts settled. The handwriting was disciplined. After September 1856, the entries changed. Names remained, but destinations became railway acquisitions. Mallow Farm, East Rig Cottages, Stoneacre, Quarry Row. Room charges continued week after week, although the inn had officially lost its license. Some guests occupied the same room on the same nights. Others were charged for meals on dates when receipts showed no bread or meat purchased. Each account ended with one phrase: transferred to B&N settlement. Lydia worked until her candle guttered. Daniel had taught her that false accounts lied in two places because every sum departed one column to enter another. The nightly room totals equaled round amounts: £2, £5, £10, unlikely for actual lodging. They looked like deductions. At 11, the footsteps began again. This time Lydia placed a cup against the ceiling. The sound was sharper through the plaster, but it carried a regular tremor beneath it. 6 beats, pause, 4 beats, scrape. Not footsteps, machinery. She followed the vibration across the parlor wall to a brass speaking tube mouthpiece hidden behind wallpaper. When she pulled away the paper, dust blew from the opening. Then someone breathed at the other end. Lydia stepped back, hammer raised. "Who is there?" The tube gave a whistle and went silent. The following morning she measured the inn. Daniel had trained her to survey workshops before estimating cartage. Outside lengths first, then internal rooms, subtracting walls and flues. The upper story measured 62 feet along the western wall. From the landing window to the eastern bedroom, the interior rooms accounted for only 56. 6 feet had disappeared. She needed access upstairs. Owen Rusk agreed to lend a ladder after she offered to reconcile his supplier accounts. He was 40, broad-shouldered, and careful not to express belief in either ghosts or railway chairmen. "I'll hold it," he said. "I won't climb through a rotten sill for figures." The eastern bedroom smelled of wet plaster. Lydia tested each board before moving. Wallpaper covered the corridor's end, where the plan suggested another 6 feet. The skirting board continued beneath the paper, but no door interrupted it. She tapped the surface. Solid brick answered. At floor level, a narrow iron flap opened onto the speaking tube. The line ran downward inside the wall toward the stable yard. As Lydia examined it, the embankment beyond the windows shuddered beneath a freight train. The sound traveled through rails, ground, and tube, reproducing the measured sequence she had heard at night. 6 loaded wagons, a brake van, 4 empty wagons, then the scrape of wheels rounding the siding curve. The ghost was railway traffic, conducted into the inn by hidden ironwork. But the breathing had been human. Lydia paid the parish 3 shillings toward the rates and obtained 10 days' grace for the remainder. She patched the parlor roof with felt bought on credit, cleaned the kitchen chimney, and repaired the range door with wire. In return for 2 evenings spent sorting invoices, Owen supplied braces for the staircase. A seamstress named Bess Calder brought soup after Lydia corrected an overcharge on her brother's freight consignment. Bellwether did not embrace her. Several men drank at the Railway Arms, owned indirectly by Vane, and called her the Inn Widow. Children dared one another to touch the White Hart's door, yet accounts proved a language through which Lydia could be useful before she was liked. She copied every guestbook entry into Daniel's ledgers, grouping names by property and date. At the parish office, Dace allowed her to inspect ratebooks only after she cited his statutory fee, and placed 6p on the counter. Families listed in the guestbook disappeared from Bellwether's rates shortly after their land passed to the railway. Most were marked removed, destination unknown. She devised a claimant table across facing pages. The left recorded what could be proved: names, properties, statutory valuations, dates of warrants. The right recorded what the inn claimed to have consumed. Whenever a fact came only from gossip, Lydia marked it in pencil rather than ink. The pattern sharpened. Families with larger awards remained fictional guests longer. A £20 claimant was charged for 3 weeks, a £100 claimant for 5 months. Yet deductions stopped at roughly 9/10 of each award, leaving enough cash to make the settlement appear voluntary. Whoever designed the scheme understood desperation. A family handed £5 after weeks of uncertainty might sign anything to escape. There was a physical inconsistency too. The guestbook assigned room 7 to 28 families, but the inn's numbers ended at 6. In early pages, room 7 appeared only beside parcels entrusted to coach guards, watches, deeds, medicines, and cash. It had been a secure dispatch room, not a bedroom. After the railway arrived, the old label allowed documents to be charged as if people had slept there. Bess helped compare handwriting. She had worked for a stationer and recognized 3 inks on supposed single-day entries. Names were written in iron gall ink browned with age. Charges were added in a blue-black fluid sold years later. Settlement notations used dense copying ink favored in railway offices. Lydia made 3 lists: what Margaret might have known, what Shaw must have known, and what remained uncertain. The discipline kept an investigation from becoming the ghost story Vane wanted it to be. One name did not disappear: Ellen Harrow, formerly of Quarry Row, now living in a laundry yard in Dunmere. Lydia found her ironing collars in a room thick with steam. Ellen was 62 and bent at the shoulders. The White Hart charged you for room 3 from October 1856 until March 1857, Lydia said. I slept there 9 nights. The book records 5 months. Ellen's iron stopped. They said the rest came from our settlement. Food, beds, transport north. My husband signed because Shaw told him the railway would prosecute us for obstructing works. Did you go north? They put us on a train to a cutting camp in Lancashire. My husband died there. I came back. Did you receive a statement? Ellen opened a wooden box and produced a folded paper. It showed compensation of £80 for 2 cottages. Deductions consumed 71. Lodging, meals, rail fares, administrative charges, and repayment of an advance Ellen denied receiving. The signature authorizing payment was an X, though her husband had signed his name in their marriage register. Other survivors emerged through Ellen. Joseph Bryce, now a cobbler, possessed a rail pass charged at £4, though its printed fare was 11 shillings. Sarah Dane had been billed for medical attendance during a month she spent nursing displaced women without a doctor. An elderly quarryman produced a paybook showing the company recovered an advance from his wages after already deducting it from his award. Each person owned 1 fragment. None alone could afford a case. Lydia understood that the fraud's strength had not been clever paperwork but isolation. Vane's agents scattered claimants across counties, turning collective theft into private misfortune. 9 former residents met in the White Hart's kitchen that Saturday. Some feared losing railway work. Others blamed neighbors who had signed first. Lydia placed her table of proven facts before them and covered her theories. We begin with what 2 records can support, she said. Memory tells us where to look. It cannot be the only place we stand. 7 agreed to let her copy their papers. 2 refused. Lydia did not write their names. Trust, like a roof, required more than declaring the rain finished. At the bottom appeared a number, H417. 4 other guest accounts carried the same pattern of letter and numbers. Lydia returned to find the parlor ransacked. The guest book was gone. Her copied ledger remained beneath a loose floorboard, but Daniel's survey chain had been taken along with 2 blankets and the good lamp. On the wall, someone had written "Go" before the ghost walks. Constable Price recorded the blankets and lamp. He declined to record the guest book because Lydia could not prove it had existed. Old books invite stories, he said. Old books invite theft when they contain something worth hiding. That night she sat in darkness beside the speaking tube. At 11, the freight train's rhythm passed. 10 minutes later came 3 soft taps, not from the railway, but from within the pipe. Lydia tapped once in reply. A child's voice whispered, "Don't tell Shaw." She recognized 12-year-old Toby Fenn, who tended signal lamps at the railway hut for $1 a week. The speaking tube ended beneath the hut floor. Toby had found it while hiding from the signalman. "I saw Mr. Shaw carry your book," he said. "He put it in the red van." "Why warn me?" "My grand's name is in it, Mary Fenn." Lydia promised not to expose him without permission. At dawn, Toby showed her the tube's outer junction. One branch entered the signal hut. Another continued beneath the stable yard to an iron plate covered by cinders. The plate was stamped H417. Owen helped lift it. Beneath lay a cramped service passage built of engineering brick. It ran toward the inn, but a fall of rubble blocked it after 20 feet. On one wall, chalk marks listed initials and sums. MF, 43 pounds. EH, 71 pounds. The figures matched deductions. Lydia believed the hidden corridor connected the stable office to the missing upper room, perhaps by a document lift. She also understood why no auctioneer had found it. The eastern end had been bricked before the inn's contents were sold, and the service passage lay beneath railway property until her conveyance restored the original boundary. Shaw returned before noon with a final offer of £100. "Generous for a building you have occupied less than a fortnight," he said. "Does it include the 2 acres, 1 rood, and 11 perches?" "Naturally." "Including the service passage?" The pleasant arrangement of his face broke. "There is no passage." "Then you are offering £100 for something that does not exist." He recovered quickly. "You have trespassed beneath the railway. I can obtain an injunction by tomorrow." "My conveyance includes the strip adjoining the turnpike. Your solicitor excluded no easement." "A widow with a ruined inn cannot fight a railway company." "Perhaps, but a railway company has now twice tried to buy a ruined inn." The injunction arrived the next afternoon. It forbade Lydia from entering any structure extending beneath company land pending survey. It did not forbid work inside the inn. She and Owen approached the bricked corridor from above. Lydia measured chimney breasts, joists, and exterior windows, then marked the missing room's position. Removing the whole wall risked the upper floor. Instead, Owen took out 6 bricks beneath a relieving arch. Cold air moved through the opening. The concealed room was narrow and windowless. A vertical iron box connected it to the speaking tube and the passage below. A hand crank operated a chain lift large enough for document cases. Shelves had been stripped except for a row of brass hooks labeled with property names. On the floor lay fragments of red sealing wax, a broken type case, and black ribbons cut from mourning bands. At the far end stood a printing press too large to remove through the corridor. Its platen carried the reversed impression of a compensation form. The discovery proved secret administration, not theft. Vane could claim the company had protected confidential papers during acquisitions. Lydia needed original settlements, payment vouchers, or testimony from someone who had handled them. Beneath the press, she found a child's slate scratched with columns. Each line paired a guestbook name with a second surname. Harrow, Bryce. Fenn, Mortlake. Wiley, Dane. The second names belonged to shareholders Lydia had seen at the hearing. She was copying them when glass shattered downstairs. Smoke climbed the stairwell. Lydia wrapped the slate in her shawl and crawled toward the window. The parlor curtains burned below. Flames had reached the repaired staircase. Owen, working in the stable, raised his ladder to the eastern sill. Lydia climbed out as villagers formed a bucket line from the pump. They saved the stone shell and kitchen. The parlor roof fell. Daniel's account case burned with his old freight books, the last pages bearing his hand. Constable Price found a broken bottle smelling of paraffin near the rear door. Shaw expressed public horror and offered Lydia temporary lodging if she signed over the property for safekeeping. She refused, but the loss unsteadied her. Daniel's books had been more than records. They contained the pencil marks by which he had taught her, his small jokes in margins, and the final account he tried to balance while fever blurred his writing. She had guarded them through eviction, only to lose them chasing strangers' names. That evening, Ellen Harrow arrived with Bess and 3 other women from displaced families. They cleared wet plaster from the kitchen and hung blankets over its broken window. "My husband's paper survived 20 years in a box," Ellen said. "Your copying gave it a purpose. That is what records are for." Lydia slept beside the cold range. At 11, no footsteps crossed the ceiling because the freight line had been closed while police inspected the fire. The silence felt more haunting than the noise. For 3 days, the kitchen became an improvised office. Damp claimant papers dried between clean cloths weighted with plates. Bess numbered each page before and after copying so no one could accuse Lydia of substitution. Owen built a locking box from stable oak. Price, embarrassed by his earlier dismissal of the guestbook, sealed their inventory with parish wax. Lydia's own loss resisted such order. She found a brass corner from Daniel's account case in the ashes and carried it until its sharp edge cut her thumb. That evening, she buried it beneath the pear tree, the only fruit tree on the property. "I thought keeping his books kept part of our life unchanged," she told Bess. "Was it unchanged?" "No, it was merely closed." She did not feel relieved after saying it. The next morning still required timber she could not afford and testimony people might withdraw. But when Toby arrived, frightened about the oil accusation, Lydia opened a fresh ledger instead of searching the ashes again. The next morning, Vane's newspapers reported that a disturbed widow had accidentally burned the inn while pursuing ghostly conspiracies. The article quoted Dace on Margaret Quill's delusions and described Lydia's secret room as a common strongroom. Her parish grace expired. With the parlor destroyed, she could not reopen the inn or earn lodging income. The company petitioned to condemn the property as a fire hazard and recover it for unpaid rates. Lydia had 6 days. She chose to spend the first on Toby Fenn. Shaw had learned someone at the signal hut warned her. Toby was dismissed and accused of stealing lamp oil used in the fire. The boy's grandmother depended on his wage. Lydia could have protected her own case by denying their contact, but the company's timesheets showed Toby tending the northern signal during the hour the fire began. She obtained a copy from a junior clerk who disliked Shaw, then testified before Price. The theft charge failed. In return, Toby's grandmother Mary opened a tin trunk she had refused to discuss. Margaret Quill had given it to her on the night the inn closed. Inside were 37 black mourning ribbons, each embroidered with a displaced family's initials. No money, deed, or account appeared. Lydia nearly mistook them for memorial tokens until she compared their widths and stitch counts with the child's slate. Each ribbon encoded 2 numbers, the claimant's true award and the amount delivered. Margaret had used a seamstress's tally system because Shaw searched written records. Bess decoded the stitches. The totals revealed that more than £2,000 had vanished from 43 settlements. "Why black?" Lydia asked. Mary's eyes hardened. "Because Margaret said the company buried living people on paper." Mary had worked as a kitchen maid at the White Hart. She explained that Vane's agents brought displaced families there before sending them to distant construction camps. Shaw used the concealed room to print revised settlements. Claimants were told lodging and transport had exhausted their awards. The original compensation warrants arrived through the underground lift from a temporary railway office. Margaret copied names in the guestbook and asked Mary to stitch the differences. When Margaret threatened to speak, Shaw arranged medical affidavits declaring her irrational. She was confined, and the families were scattered. Why did no one challenge them? With what money? With whose solicitor? Half could not read the forms. Is Margaret alive? She was when the asylum wrote last Christmas. Lydia traveled to St. Orizon's County Asylum with Mr. Pelham, a solicitor willing to defer fees after seeing Ellen's statement and the ribbons. Margaret Quill was 70, white-haired, and entirely aware of why they had come. "I waited for someone who could count," she said. She had hidden the original warrants rather than destroy them, but confinement prevented retrieval. Her clue was maddeningly spare. The coach that never traveled kept every honest passenger. The White Hart's yard contained the remains of 4 coaches. 3 had been sold for firewood. The 4th, an old yellow mail coach, stood inside the collapsed north shed without wheels or doors. It had never traveled after the railway opened. Lydia and Owen examined it under the eye of the constable. Its interior panels were worm-eaten. The roof carried no box. The axle beds were empty. Lydia almost abandoned the search until she noticed that the painted number on the near side read 41, while old yard inventories described coach 14. Reverse numbers, like type in the hidden press. The coach's rear panel opened only when 2 brass luggage studs were turned in reverse. Inside the double wall lay oilskin packets containing original compensation warrants, claimant statements, compulsory purchase notices, and letters from Vane to Shaw. The paper survived because Margaret had sealed each packet with wax and lined the compartment with tin. One bundle concerned the White Hart itself. Before the railway, the inn belonged to a road accommodation trust, established by 3 coaching proprietors. Its deed required that income support stranded travelers, injured drivers, and widows of transport workers. The trustees could sell only by unanimous consent and public notice. Vane had obtained 2 signatures. Margaret, the 3rd trustee after her husband's death, had refused. Shaw then had her confined and transferred the inn through a forged mark. More followed. The 2 acres behind the stable were not merely convenient for a freight spur. An 1848 agreement reserved access to the only gentle grade through the ridge. Without it, Vane's proposed western junction required either an expensive cutting or a curve too sharp for heavy mineral trains. Lydia possessed the operational key to a contract worth thousands, but the trust deed meant she could not simply sell for personal fortune. Her conveyance from the railway, signed without exclusions, had unintentionally returned the property to a qualifying transport widow. To establish title, she still needed the original trust deed, proof of the forgery, and a court's recognition. The packets contained a certified copy, not the deed itself. Margaret's letters referred to the deed being where arrivals speak before names are known. Lydia studied the phrase all night. At a coaching inn, arrivals announced themselves at the horn. Before passengers gave names, the guard sounded a note. The old coaching horn hung painted black above the stable arch. Its brass tube contained a rolled strip of vellum too narrow to be the deed. On it, Margaret had written shelf references for the diocesan registry and the names of 2 witnesses. One witness was dead. The other, retired coach proprietor Gideon Bale, lived near York. Pelham telegraphed the registry and sent a clerk north. The registered memorial established the trust's creation and summarized restrictions. Bale's sworn statement confirmed Margaret's refusal and identified the forged mark. The original deed, he recalled, had been deposited with Dunmere Bank as security for the trust's benevolent fund. The bank claimed no record. Lydia used the ribbons again. Their 43rd line did not correspond to a displaced family. It carried initials DB and an undelivered sum of £11 8 shillings. Daniel had taught her that unexplained remainders often represented fees. She searched the inn's trivial receipts and found annual payments of £11 8 shillings to Dunmere Bank for box custody until 1856. Presented with receipts and the registry memorial, the bank's chief clerk searched its dormant custody index. The deed lay in box 317, under the obsolete name Dunmere Benevolent Road Fund. Shaw had tried to retrieve it in 1857, but lacked the 3rd trustee's seal. The legal chain was complete enough to request an injunction against demolition and an accounting of the railway settlements. Pelham warned that completeness on paper did not guarantee survival in court. "They will attack custody," he said. "They will claim Margaret forged the warrants, Mary invented the ribbons, and you gathered claims to enrich yourself. Then we show where every object was before I arrived." They constructed a provenance schedule. Mary's daughter confirmed the tin trunk had stood unopened in her mother's room since childhood. Asylum correspondence mentioned Margaret's repeated requests that stitched memorials be protected. The coach appeared in auction inventories as unsold because its rear body was warped, proving it remained on site. Bank clerks documented the deed's custody from 1849. Registry memorials predated the dispute. Lydia calculated what she herself could gain. Under Vane's offer, £100. Under the trust, a custodian's reasonable wage subject to public accounts. She entered both sums in her affidavit. Why include his offer? Pelham asked. Because they will. Her openness deprived Vane of an accusation he had prepared. It also required Lydia to admit that after the fire she had considered taking Shaw's money. The company counsel later called that greed. Pelham called it proof that an honest witness could acknowledge temptation without inventing innocence. Vane struck before the hearing. At dawn, company navvies arrived with chains, wagons, and a demolition order signed by 2 local magistrates. Pelham was still returning from the county judge. Price read the order and admitted it appeared valid. Lydia stood in the stable gateway holding her conveyance. You may remove a dangerous structure, she told Shaw. But the order lists the eastern parlor wall. That wall already fell. It does not authorize the stable, coach, or hidden room. Shaw instructed the men to proceed. Owen, Bess, Ellen, Mary, Toby, and a dozen villagers occupied the yard. They carried no weapons. Each held a copied claimant statement or ribbon, making clear what would be destroyed and who witnessed it. The navvies hesitated. Many had lost land or wages to railway contractors themselves. Vane arrived by special train and walked from the embankment in a polished hat. Mrs. Mercer, he called, you are inciting a riot over worthless paper. Then wait for the judge. The law has spoken. 2 magistrates who own shares in your railway have spoken. His public calm thinned. Take the coach first. That order exposed him. The demolition schedule did not mention the coach, and no one outside Lydia's group should have known it held documents. Price asked Vane how he knew which object mattered. Vane answered that the entire yard was unsafe. But 3 reporters had arrived with Pelham's clerk and recorded the exchange. Then the county injunction came, by mounted messenger. The White Hart remained standing until the inquiry. Public reckoning unfolded over 9 days in the Dunmere Corn Exchange. Lydia did not prevail by presenting one dramatic secret. Pelham assembled evidence in the order Daniel would have demanded. The parliamentary acquisition schedules proved what the railway owed. Original warrants from the coach showed sums released. Ellen and 14 surviving claimants testified to sums received. Margaret's ribbons independently encoded the differences. Bank accounts traced corresponding deposits into nominee companies whose shareholders included Vane, Shaw, and 2 directors. The guestbook copy linked displaced families to invented lodging periods. Bakery receipts and stable accounts proved the inn could not have supplied the meals charged. Parish registers showed that several supposed X marks belonged to literate men and women. Toby testified about Shaw taking the guestbook and about the speaking tube. The junior clerk produced timesheets clearing Toby of the fire. Owen identified the paraffin bottle as one sold by a railway stores contractor. A stores ledger placed 6 bottles in Shaw's possession that week. No witness saw him light the fire, so the charge of arson remained uncertain, but the evidence established intimidation and concealment. Margaret entered the hall on Pelham's arm. An independent physician had examined her and found no basis for continued confinement. She identified the printing press, the document lift, Vane's letters, and the hidden warrants. Gideon Bale identified her genuine signature. Dunmere Bank produced the original trust deed. Vane's counsel argued that Lydia's own title failed because the railway could not convey property it had acquired improperly. Pelham answered that Lydia claimed not absolute beneficial ownership, but lawful custodianship as a transport widow in possession under the company's sealed conveyance, subject to court appointment of new trustees. The court need not enrich her to protect the property. It need only prevent the wrongdoer from profiting through his own defective transfer. The judge agreed provisionally and appointed Lydia and Margaret temporary custodians until a full chancery settlement. On the sixth day, the company attempted another defense. Its accountant, Mr. Voss, presented a handsome ledger showing every disputed deduction funding transport, housing, and charitable relief. The pages balanced perfectly. Lydia inspected the binding. The early gatherings carried ordinary stationer's sewing, but the disputed section had been inserted on new guards. Its paper bore an 1868 watermark, 12 years after the transactions it recorded. Voss claimed damaged pages had been recopied.
From what originals?
Lydia asked. He produced loose vouchers. They looked convincing until she ordered them by serial number. True vouchers were numbered when printed, then issued in approximate date order. Voss's 1856 vouchers formed a perfect sequence despite covering 5 distant offices. More tellingly, their penny revenue stamps used a design introduced after 1860. Under questioning, Voss admitted Shaw instructed him to reconstruct the ledger after Lydia found the hidden room. A letter from Vane demanded no untidy remainder. His pursuit of perfect appearances had created fresh evidence of concealment. Vane might still have separated himself from Shaw's forged deductions. His own vanity prevented it. He insisted upon speaking, claiming he never examined minor compensation accounts. Lydia asked permission to show him 3 dividend reports signed in his hand. Each contained an unusual accounting abbreviation, TRNS.set. The same phrase appeared in letters ordering Shaw to transfer settlement balances into nominee companies. A clerk's shorthand, Vane said. Your private dividend book uses it 17 times, Lydia replied. That book had been produced by a director seeking immunity. Its entries matched the mourning ribbons to the pound. Vane called the resemblance coincidence. Lydia then demonstrated an error repeated across all 3 systems. Ellen Harrow's award had been entered as £80 in the warrant, but the nominee account received £71 after a clerk transposed 9 shillings into £9. The same erroneous difference appeared in Vane's dividend calculation. Only someone reconciling the stolen funds could have copied that error. The silence that followed held no ghosts. The inquiry referred Vane, Shaw, and 2 directors for prosecution on conspiracy, fraud, forgery, and perjury. Vane resigned his chairmanship before shareholders removed him. His country house and railway shares were placed under restraint to satisfy restitution claims. Shaw was arrested while attempting to board a packet at Hull. The magistrates who signed the demolition order faced a separate inquiry for undisclosed interests. The railway did not collapse physically. Trains continued to carry workers, coal, letters, and livestock. What collapsed was Vane's ownership of its virtue. Receivers reorganized the company, canceled the Western Junction scheme, and negotiated openly for any future use of trust land. 43 claimant accounts were reopened. Not every family could be found, and money could not return dead husbands or lost orchards. A court-supervised fund paid survivors and descendants where provenance was proved. Unclaimed balances endowed legal assistance for people facing compulsory purchase. Lydia received compensation for her cottage, workshop machinery, and orchard at an independently assessed value, less the nominal value assigned to the White Hart. She paid Daniel's final debts and could have rented a clean house in Dunmere. The settlement fund had to distinguish proof from sympathy. Lydia spent months writing to parish officers, registrars, employers, and relatives. Some claims failed because identity could not be established. Others divided among quarreling heirs. One man demanded payment under 2 surnames and threatened her when she detected the duplication. People who once called the fraud imaginary now accused her of prolonging repayment with rules. Lydia insisted on the same standard that defeated Vane. Money must follow a documented person, not a persuasive story. Where displacement had destroyed records, the trustees accepted converging evidence: marriage entries, paybooks, letters, witnesses, and matching ribbon codes. They published reasons for each decision without exposing private details. Appeals went to an independent barrister. Margaret watched the first approved family receive £32 and began to cry, then became angry at being observed. It should have been done 15 years ago. Yes, Lydia said. They did not call delayed justice complete. They called it paid. She remained at the inn. Restoration began with priorities rather than romance. The trust's recovered bank balance stabilized the western wall and rebuilt the kitchen roof. Insurance proceeds, delayed by the arson investigation, covered part of the parlor. The eastern upper story waded through winter beneath tarpaulins because sound oak cost more than sentiment. Owen supervised structural work at ordinary wages. Bess organized a sewing room but refused charity, proposing instead that the trust purchase linen from a cooperative of displaced women. Margaret returned as an honored advisor, not a saint.
Confinement had left her suspicious and sometimes sharp.
She and Lydia argued over whether the hidden room should remain sealed. Margaret wanted every brick removed. Lydia believed the room itself was evidence. They compromised by opening the wall behind a locked glass screen. The printing press, document lift, guest hooks, and speaking tube remained in place, with written explanations. Copies of the settlement papers were available in the restored parlor. Originals went to secure county archives under joint custody. By spring, the White Hart had 4 safe bedrooms. It did not compete with the railway for ordinary travelers. Its charter gave priority to families displaced by public works, injured transport laborers, and widows traveling to hearings. Guests paid according to means. Commercial rooms and a small dining room supported the rest. The finances nearly failed in the first year. Charitable beds filled while paying travelers preferred Dunmere's newer hotels. Coal rose in price. A cracked kitchen boiler consumed £8 meant for glazing. Lydia refused to borrow from claimant restitution, even temporarily. The answer came from the property's original purpose. Carriers still used the turnpike for goods unsuited to rail schedules. Owen repaired 2 stable bays, and Lydia opened a secure parcel exchange. Local makers left goods for collection. Railway passengers sent trunks onward by cart. Farmers combined small consignments for lower freight rates. Service fees supported the rooms without turning need into debt. She published quarterly balances in the parlor. The first showed a loss of £1 14 shillings. The second showed a profit of 9 shillings. By the fourth, the inn could fund 1 clerk and contribute to roof reserves. Restoration advanced 1 bay at a time. Lydia established a public account desk every Thursday. Anyone could bring a compensation offer, freight bill, lease, or wage statement. She charged those able to pay and recorded free work as a trust expense. Young clerks learned double-entry bookkeeping beneath Daniel's rescued framing hammer, which hung above the desk. His books were gone, but his method survived in other hands. Toby became the first apprentice. He learned signals in the morning and accounts in the afternoon, discovering that both disciplines depended upon exact messages. Ellen Harrow managed the linen store. Mary Fenn supervised the kitchen with rules stricter than any railway timetable. Bess's cooperative supplied sheets to 3 inns within 2 years. The trust also purchased a small hand press for notices and plain language guides. Lydia wrote the first pamphlet, How to Read a Compensation Statement, with examples showing valuation, deductions, interest, and the difference between a receipt and a release of claim. Pelham removed unnecessary legal phrases. Margaret restored 2 that protected widows. Copies traveled by carrier to villages marked for canals, reservoirs, and new lines. Railway managers disliked the pamphlet but gradually learned to bring clearer accounts to Thursday meetings. One engineer even asked Lydia to review a relocation schedule before construction began. She charged the company her full commercial fee and offered affected households free appointments. Prevention produced no dramatic hearing, yet Lydia considered the first settlement completed without concealment a greater victory than Vane's conviction. Each Michaelmas, the trustees read aloud the names still unresolved. Some would never be paid because records and descendants had vanished. Their balances remained invested for public assistance rather than absorbed as profit. Margaret called this the difference between money waiting honestly and money pretending its owner never existed. Owen repaired the pale sign but did not repaint the heart immediately. "People know the absence now," he said.
Lydia understood. The blank animal had become a mark of everything omitted from official accounts.
Not all villagers changed. Mr. Dace maintained that respectable progress required unpleasant decisions and resented every request to inspect parish books. One farmer complained that claimants received attention merely because their wrongs had become famous. Lydia answered neither with gratitude nor anger. She posted the trust accounts where he could read them. 3 years after the hearing, a new white heart appeared on the sign, painted by the daughter of a navvy who had refused Vane's demolition order. Behind it, she left a thin outline of the old absence. The underground passage was never reopened for travel. Its unstable section was filled, while the safe portion became an exhibit reached from the stable yard. The speaking tube remained connected to the signal hut.
At 11 each night, freight trains sent their rhythm through the walls. Wagons, brake van, empty trucks, the long scrape around the curve. New guests sometimes mistook the sound for footsteps. Lydia would show them the tube and explain how ordinary machinery had once been used to make frightened people doubt their senses. Then she would bring out the copied guestbook. The original book returned 5 years after the fire. It was found among Shaw's effects after his conviction, stripped of its cover but intact. Lydia placed it beside Margaret's ribbons. Against each false charge, she added the sum restored and the date paid. Where no claimant could be found, she wrote transferred to the Public Assistance Fund. She did not erase the fraudulent entries. An honest account did not hide the theft. It carried the correction beside it. On a pale autumn evening, Lydia stood beneath the stable arch as a westbound train climbed the embankment. Its windows shone through rain. The railway had destroyed her orchard and brought strangers to her door. It had scattered families and later carried some of them home. Like any machine, it magnified the purpose of those directing it. Inside, Toby balanced the daybook while Mary called supper. Margaret sat near the restored hearth, correcting a young reporter who had called her mad years too casually. 4 travelers' coats steamed on hooks where fraudulent names once hung. The train passed, and the old inn settled around the fading vibration. Lydia closed the account book only after both columns agreed. Above the door, the white hart faced the road again, while its shadow preserved the shape of what had once been missing.